ethics is not arbitrary. The way that God has ordered the universe is that when we conform ourselves to that pattern and to that plan, it is allowing us to live the lives that we're meant to live. Christian morality is true morality, period. Our culture, even our secular progressive culture today, still has an admiration for Jesus. It has an admiration for kind of gentle Jesus, warm and fuzzy Jesus. But what it doesn't have much admiration for is biblical Christianity that then requires something of you. We love Christ as Christians. Christ expects us to follow Him. And that's what ethics really is. It's to live in a manner worthy of the calling of the life that Christ has given us. You're not going to lose your job for holding to proper Trinitarian theology. But if you believe that marriage is the union of one man and one woman, that can cost you some social capital. It can cost you your job. What we have right now in the West in particular is what I would refer to as an anthropological crisis. Issues like, what does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be male or female? What is marriage? All of the issues that are bearing down on Christianity in the West are deeply ethical in nature, which means something. It means that you are going to be made to care. And so one of the reasons I think this resource is so important is because you are no longer allowed the luxury of sitting on the sidelines. Western culture is jettisoning its Christian foundations, which means those of us who are Christians in this culture have to be able to give a defense, give a reason for the hope that is within us. And that hope, yes, is about gospel proclamation hope, but it's also a belief that the gospel saves us, but the gospel also calls us to a particular life. It also calls us to uphold the fabric of creation that God has put into His creation order. I think of ethics as kind of best explained as really applied theology. What this means is that our ideas about God do not simply stay in our head. Ideas have consequences. This is a really interesting quote from a serial killer. This is a weird person to quote. He says, "If a person doesn't think that there is a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges?" Notice that Jeffrey Dahmer is saying something actually really correct, that if there is no God, all things are possible. There really are no moral constraints or moral absolutes. So what begins with ideas ends up trickling out in how we live our life. Now, the formula for relating theology to ethics is one of the most important relationships in Christian thought. And here's how I would state what that relationship is. Ethics actually reveals what our true theology is. Theology should be the foundation of our ethics. But how we end up living our lives on a daily basis, our ethics, is going to reflect and testify to what we actually believe is really true. And in fact, today, I would argue that individuals drift into heresy around their ethics, not so much their theology. What we believe at the level of our true self in our head is eventually going to work its way out. And I think sadly today, ethics is one of the ways that modern day evangelicalism is actually liberalizing. Let me ask you a question. Can you find someone who affirms LGBT identities who also affirms the exclusivity of Christ? And the answer to that is no, because theology and ethics are a package deal. Ethics helps us understand the testimony and the united witness of God, Scripture, and natural law. In other words, it helps us think about what morality really is. God does not create a morally schizophrenic universe. He doesn't have a split personality. He doesn't say that there is morality over here for Christians and then there's morality over there for non-Christians. No, what we understand is that when God creates in Genesis chapter 1, and when we see it in Psalm 19, you see this understanding of creation order that is orderly, there's pattern, and there is design. And so God knits order and moral order into the very fabric of His creation that every single human being is accountable to, whether they are a Christian or not. This means something critically for how we think about what morality is. It means that Christian morality is true morality, period. We have to understand this as an issue about the battle for truth in our age. Now, I want to read a quote from Cornelius Van Til because I think Cornelius Van Til captures what's at stake with truth and ethics. He says this, he says, "The Christian theistic conception of an absolute God and an absolute Christ and an absolute Scripture go hand in hand. We cannot accept one without accepting the other. It is with the Scriptures as an absolute and absolutely comprehensive authority that we enter upon a discussion of ethical questions as they confront us. We are fully persuaded that the only alternative to this position is the position of an out-and-out positivism and pragmatism. All halfway positions eventually lead to either one or the other of the two positions spoken of, an absolute submission to Scripture and to God, or an absolute rejection of both." What Van Til is getting at is this. It's Christ and morality, or it's not Christ and moral chaos. We have to choose wisely. What we have to understand is that the church's main enemy in the West is not just unbelief, but it's unbelief in the form of secularism. What we see right now is that secularism operates under the guise of neutrality, but what secularism does is that it changes the goalposts of how we argue and interact in the culture. You often hear the phrase, it's the separation of church and state. You can't impose your morality on someone else. The same people who are saying that are, guess what? They're imposing their morality on you. Now, we can argue for the separation of church and state as an institutional reality, but if you want to affirm that, as I think we should, it doesn't mean that you can separate government from morality. There is always going to be a moral code or a moral system somewhere. Nature abhors a vacuum. It's a question of what the moral system is going to be. Ethics is also deeply personal. It's about personal holiness. This means it's going to have massive ramifications for how we think about the relationship between justification and sanctification. And we're going to talk about that in a later lecture. But Philippians 1:27 says this, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel." This is not kind of a conditional statement of, oh, well, you can live however you want. No, this is a statement of you ought to. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel. The assumption in the New Testament is that upon conversion, something is wrought inside each of us that changes our affections, and we begin to desire holiness. And holiness changes everything. And as we think about why this matters with regard to the personal dimension, if we understand what ethics is, it helps us to understand why God commands the moral action that He does. Now, that might sound very academic, but here's what this means. If we order our lives as God calls us, that better enables us to have friendship with God, to glorify God, and to commune with Him as how we were meant to commune with Him as human beings. So what this means is rightly ordered morality, rightly ordered ethics reinforces the creator-creature relationship. And please hear me, because all God-glorifying action is meant to be human-fulfilling action. And this changes everything as we think about the significance of what ethics is. It means that ethics is not arbitrary. God is not willing arbitrary things that could be good or could be bad. No, it means that the way that God has ordered the universe is that He's ordered it in such a way that when we conform ourselves to that pattern and to that plan, it is allowing us to live the lives that we're meant to live, that we're able to flourish. But there's a secondary horizon with it. It means it also glorifies God. You think about something like 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Whatever you eat or drink, what does Paul say? Do it all to the glory of God. Now, we all immediately just want to dwell on do it all to the glory of God. We focus on the glory of God part, right? But according to what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, there's a way that we can eat and there's a way that we can drink that actually honors God. Ethics implicates everything. It implicates how we live our lives, what it means to flourish as a human being, but it also has God's glory at stake. Ethics, in addition to our personal holiness, is also about helping us to love our neighbor. As we think about the mass cultural confusion going on around us, one of the ways we best love our neighbor is to tell the truth to our neighbor. I'm less concerned with the culture out there agreeing with Andrew Walker. I'm more concerned with the culture out there agreeing with the very order of creation that God has stamped upon His creation and instructing the culture to say, you can't go down that path. If you go down that path, it's going to result in human collateral and human damage. We want to end our discussion on ethics with this big Latin phrase that you'll often hear in some of the Reformers' works. The Reformers will use the phrase summum bonum. Summum bonum means that there is the highest good that human beings ought to be pointing themselves towards. Now, there is a human good. The human good in terms of ordering your life in such a way that you're able to reach the full God-given potential of how God has created you. But the summum bonum, the ultimate good, the highest good, is God and the glory of God. And it is an act of love that God has revealed Himself in His Word and allows us to live faithfully and obediently in response to that revelation.
The lost generation wandered without direction after World War I. Well, today, there's another war raging. It's a cultural battle, and it's leaving young men disoriented and directionless. Raised on unfiltered entertainment and endless online content, Gen Z is facing unprecedented challenges with loneliness and depression. But there is hope. That's Way of Manhood with Dr. Adam Tyson, and it's available right now at Fortis Plus and all of your favorite podcast platforms.